Hours before my cousin's wedding, I found a note taped under my windshield wiper in bold, hurried handwriting that made my skin crawl. Don't go until you check the basement. At first, I laughed nervously, assuming some kid in the neighborhood was pulling a prank. But something about the ink smudged by the morning dew and the way the letters pressed hard into the paper made me pause. I stood there in my driveway, clutching the scrap like it was burning my fingers, my car keys trembling in my other hand, staring at the house I had shared with Ethan for 8 years. Everything about this day was supposed to feel joyful. My cousin Daniel was finally marrying Rachel, the woman he'd adored since college, and I'd poured months of effort into making their wedding perfect, from calling vendors late at night when Daniel was too stressed, to hand-lettering place cards until my wrist ached, to spending more than I should have on centerpieces, just so Rachel wouldn't worry about costs. I had chosen a soft gray dress that felt elegant enough to blend in, yet respectful enough not to draw attention. But now, all of that care felt like it was collapsing under the weight of this one cryptic warning. My reflection in the car's side window showed eyes already clouded with unease, and though I told myself this was ridiculous, my gut twisted with the kind of dread you can't laugh away. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, let me pause and welcome you. Thank you for being here, listening to stories of family, truth, and resilience. If you believe in protecting those you love, hit subscribe. It's free and helps us share these powerful lessons with more people. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you found a note like this before such an important family day? Now, with my pulse hammering in my ears, I turned toward the basement door, knowing that opening it might change everything. I told myself I was being ridiculous, even as I slid the basement key off its hook in the kitchen and held it in my damp palm like it weighed 100 pounds. The note still folded and crumpled in my other hand. The basement was never somewhere I spent much time. Just a cold, concrete space with old paint cans, boxes from Ethan's past jobs, and holiday decorations stacked against the wall. I hadn't been down there in months. The moment I pushed open the door, the familiar smell of damp cardboard and dust met me, and the bulb above the stairs flickered uncertainly, as if warning me back. I gripped the railing and forced myself down, each step echoing too loudly in the silence of the early morning. My heart pounded as I scanned the shelves. Everything looked normal at first glance, just clutter, just storage. But then I saw it. A battered wooden chest tucked behind a stack of moving boxes, half hidden like it was never meant to be found. It was smaller than a suitcase, about the size of a shoebox, but the way it sat wedged into the corner, covered with a thin film of dust, made my breath hitch. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I dragged it into the open, the scrape of wood against cement sounding like nails on a chalkboard. My fingers fumbled with the latch, and when it gave way, what I saw inside turned my stomach to stone. There were small velvet jewelry boxes, some opened to reveal delicate necklaces, and earrings I'd never seen before. Definitely not mine. A silver charm bracelet with tiny initials hung limply across the dark lining of the chest. The kind of gift meant to be personal, intimate. Next to it, a silk scarf still held a faint, expensive perfume scent that didn't belong in my house. Underneath the fabric were photographs, dozens of them, and my chest squeezed tight as I lifted the first one. It was Ethan, my husband, smiling in the easy way he hadn't smiled at me in years. His arm around Rachel, my cousin's fiancée, the very woman who was supposed to walk down the aisle in just a few hours. My breath came out in a strangled gasp as I dropped the photo, but I couldn't stop. I flipped through one after another. Ethan and Rachel at a lake, their faces pressed together like teenagers in love. Ethan and Rachel at some cafe I didn't recognize, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder, their hands entwined on the table. These weren't old or accidental shots. They were recent, purposeful, intimate moments, captured and saved. I whispered out loud, "No, no, no," as if saying it would undo the images burning into my mind. But the evidence was undeniable, especially when I reached the stack of printed text messages tucked underneath the photos. The first one made my knees buckle. "Ethan, after the wedding, we won't have to hide anymore. Just a few more hours." The reply, unmistakably his number. "I know. Pretending with Claire is eating me alive. Tonight, we'll finally start our real life." My vision blurred, the words swimming as tears stung my eyes. Another message from Rachel. "Daniel is clueless. He thinks I'm nervous about vows." I almost laughed. And Ethan's reply, "Stay strong. You'll be his wife on paper, but mine in reality. He doesn't have to know." The paper trembled in my hands, my chest heaving as the betrayal sank deeper with every line I read. They weren't just sneaking around. They were plotting a future, weaving lies around two people who loved them most. My cousin Daniel, who had trusted Rachel with his whole heart, who had told me just last week how lucky he felt to marry her. And me, his older cousin, his confidant, the one who had promised him she'd always have his back. And here I was, holding proof that the people closest to us were about to shatter his life into pieces. My head spun, the cold concrete floor tilting beneath me. I braced against the chest, but my body shook so violently I almost knocked over the stack of boxes behind me. 1,000 thoughts clashed in my mind at once. I thought of Daniel as a little boy, his hand in mine on the way to school, trusting me to protect him. I thought of Rachel sitting across from me at cake tastings, asking my advice on flowers, hugging me when I said I'd help cover the photography deposit, so Daniel wouldn't stress about money. She had smiled at me with wide, grateful eyes while secretly laughing behind my back. And Ethan, my husband, my partner, the man I had built a life with. I thought of every night he came home late, claiming he was troubleshooting for a client, every distracted kiss, every untouched cup of coffee left behind on our counter. How many of those nights had been stolen by Rachel? How many lies had I swallowed without knowing? For a moment, I wanted to scream, to tear the photos to pieces, to hurl the chest against the wall and shatter every trace of their deception. But something inside me froze solid, a cold clarity cutting through the storm of pain. This wasn't just about me. If I let my anger take over, Daniel would walk into the church today and marry a woman who had never loved him, a woman already planning her exit strategy into Ethan's arms. I couldn't let that happen, no matter how broken I felt. My tears blurred the edges of the photos, but I forced myself to gather them carefully, slipping them back into the chest, my hands trembling but deliberate. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me so hard I nearly dropped everything. It was my mother, texting a cheerful reminder. "Claire, don't forget the ring pillow. Daniel is so nervous this morning. We can't wait to see you." The words on the screen twisted the knife in deeper. My family had no idea. Daniel had no idea. And in just a couple of hours, he would be standing at the altar, smiling at Rachel with pure devotion, while she secretly planned to destroy him. I wiped my face with my sleeve, breathing hard, staring around the basement like the walls themselves were closing in. I felt like I was standing inside a crime scene, except the crime hadn't happened yet, and stopping it depended on me. I locked the chest back up, but not before snapping photos of every piece of evidence with my phone. Each picture, the jewelry, the scarf, the smiling faces, the text printouts, was like capturing a shard of glass I knew I'd eventually have to cut someone with. My fingers shook on the screen, but I took them all, methodically, one by one. Because as much as it broke me, I couldn't walk into that church empty-handed. As I climbed the basement stairs, the creak of each step sounded louder than my own heartbeat, and when I shut the door behind me, I leaned against it, pressing the folded warning note to my chest like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Whoever had left it, they wanted me to know before it was too late. And now, I did. The only question left was what I was going to do about it. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone pressed flat against the wood, the screen glowing with the photos I had just taken. Each image like a knife I knew I would have to use sooner than later. And, though my whole body trembled from the storm in the basement, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a wife betrayed anymore. I was the only person who could keep Daniel from walking into a trap. And that realization sobered me, more than any tear could. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at Ethan's coffee mug still on the counter. The same one he'd left behind that morning. A ring of cold black liquid circling the bottom like a stain that would never wash out. And I thought about how many times I'd excused his distance, how many times I'd told myself marriages settle, passion fades, people get busy, when really, he'd been pouring himself into someone else. I wanted to curl up on the floor and never move. But instead, my hand moved to dial the only person I trusted enough to say this out loud to: Maya, my oldest friend since 5th grade, now a lawyer in Cleveland who had seen me through college heartbreaks and the shaky first years of my marriage. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy but warm, and the moment I heard her say, "Claire, is everything okay?" my breath broke, and I spilled the whole story between shaky gasps. The note, the basement, the chest, the photos, Rachel's messages, Ethan's promises of a secret life. There was a silence on the other end so sharp I thought she'd hung up, until she said quietly, "Claire, you need to keep calm. Don't confront them yet. Document everything, every single piece. If you blow up too early, they'll turn this against you. Trust me." Her lawyer's brain clicked into place immediately. But it was the way she said, "You can't let Daniel go through with this wedding," that made me realize she was just as horrified as I was. So, I listened. I wiped my face, straightened my dress, and began photographing the evidence more methodically, framing the jewelry so the initials showed clearly, zooming in on the text printouts until Ethan's number was visible in sharp detail, snapping close-ups of Rachel's handwriting on a post-it note I hadn't even noticed before that read, "After the vows will slip away. Call me when you can." Each click of my phone camera steadied me, like I was gathering ammunition for a battle I hadn't asked for, but couldn't walk away from. Maya kept talking in my ear, grounding me, telling me to back up the photos in case Ethan got suspicious, and tried to erase anything from the house. She reminded me to stay composed in front of family, because the one thing people like Rachel and Ethan thrived on was painting others as unstable. And I couldn't give them that weapon. I scribbled down a checklist in my planner. Evidence saved, backup created, clutch purse ready. Feeling like I was planning for war instead of a wedding. Then, as if fate wanted to test me, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, and my heart seized. Ethan was home early. I barely had time to slide the planner shut and shove my phone under a stack of mail before the front door opened. He walked in with that distracted energy he always had, scrolling on his phone, setting down his laptop bag without even glancing at me. For a terrifying moment, I thought he knew that somehow Rachel had tipped him off or the note writer had warned him too. But he just poured himself water and muttered, "Forgot my charger." He finally looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly at whatever he saw on my face. "You okay?" he asked like he was half interested, and my throat clenched because I wanted to scream at him, to shove the photos in his face, to demand how he could betray me and Daniel at the same time. But Maya's warning rang in my head. Don't confront them yet. So I forced a small smile, told him I was just nervous for the big day, and watched him nod absently, kiss the air near my cheek, and disappear back out the door. As the engine faded down the street, I collapsed against the counter, my hands shaking from holding the mask so tightly in place. The hours stretched thin after that. My mother kept texting about decorations. My aunt called to ask if I could pick up Rachel's veil from the tailor. And each normal request felt surreal against the evidence burning in my phone. I packed the clutch with my lipstick, tissues, and the small flash drive Maya had told me to load with copies of the photos. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked polished, ready for a family wedding. But behind her eyes lived a storm no one else could see. I thought about Daniel, how he trusted me, how he had always looked up to me like a second sister, how just last week he'd asked nervously if Rachel really seemed happy. I'd laughed and reassured him then, because I believed her smiles were genuine. But now I realized they had been rehearsals in her long performance. The thought made me clench my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. Before I left the house, I called Maya again. She said, "Claire, you're walking into enemy territory. Keep your cool. Don't show your cards until the moment it matters most." Her words steadied me. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was strategy. And for the first time since I opened that chest, I felt a spark of something fierce. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was love for Daniel. But it was enough to straighten my spine as I locked the door and headed to my car. The note still sat folded in my pocket, a reminder that someone out there had wanted me to know. Someone had decided to give me this chance to stop the wedding before it ruined Daniel's life. Whoever they were, I silently thanked them as I gripped the steering wheel, because now I wasn't just a bystander in my own heartbreak. I was Daniel's shield, and I would not let him be destroyed. The closer I got to the church rehearsal, the tighter the walls seemed to close around me, and even the late summer air pressing through the car window felt heavy, as if the entire town was in on a secret I had only just been allowed to glimpse. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Running behind. We'll meet you there." Simple words, but they made my chest clench. Behind them lived an entire world of lies I could no longer unsee. When I pulled into the parking lot, I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, clutching the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe evenly, whispering the same mantra over and over. Keep calm, keep calm, keep calm, because Maya's voice still echoed in my mind. Don't show your cards until the moment it matters most. I tucked the flash drive deeper into my clutch, dabbed powder on my face to hide the swelling around my eyes, and stepped into the role I had to play. The dutiful cousin, the supportive wife, the woman no one suspected of carrying the truth that could blow this day apart. Inside, the church was alive with laughter and chatter, the kind of noise that usually warms me, but now grated against my skin like static. White ribbons were being tied to pews, candles tested along the aisle, Rachel's mother fussing over the flower girls. And then, there she was, Rachel, gliding through the sanctuary in a pale sundress, hair perfectly curled, smile glowing like she was already wearing the crown of bridehood. She rushed over to me, clutching my hands with faux affection, and whispered, "Claire, thank you for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her eyes were bright, but too calculating, the way a salesperson studies a customer to gauge if they're buying the act. I swallowed bile, forcing a smile, and told her it was nothing, even as my heart screamed that every word from her mouth was poison. She leaned in closer and murmured, "Just for me. You look exhausted. Don't let the stress of planning steal the joy from you, okay?" The smug little curve of her lips told me she wasn't just being polite. She was taunting me, certain I was too blind or too weak to see the truth she and Ethan had woven together. I excused myself before my mask cracked, slipping into a side pew where Daniel stood nervously adjusting his cufflinks. He looked so boyish in that moment, so full of earnest hope, and when he saw me, his whole face softened. "Claire, does this tie look all right?" he whispered, holding it out like a child asking his mother for reassurance. My throat tightened because all I wanted to do was scream at him to run, to tear that tie off and never look back. But instead, I adjusted it gently and said, "You look perfect. She's lucky." The words scraped against my tongue like glass, but Daniel smiled, shoulders loosening, and for a moment, I hated Rachel and Ethan more than I ever thought possible, for forcing me to lie to the one person I wanted to protect most. The rehearsal went on with scripted precision. Walk down the aisle, pause, exchange cues, laughter bubbling when the flower girl dropped petals too early. On the surface, it was ordinary. But under the surface, I noticed every flicker of Rachel's phone screen as she checked it compulsively. Every subtle glance she cast toward the back doors, where Ethan had finally slipped in late, dressed too casually, pretending to be absorbed in his own phone. When their eyes met across the room, the corner of her lips twitched almost imperceptibly. But I caught it, the kind of look lovers give when they think no one else is watching. My stomach turned as I realized they couldn't even contain themselves for a single rehearsal. Afterwards, in the fellowship hall, everyone gathered for coffee and cookies. And that's when Ethan finally cornered me. He slid his arm casually around my waist, the way husbands do in public. But his grip felt too tight, possessive, almost as if he was testing me. "You've been quiet today," he murmured, his eyes scanning my face. "Something wrong?" I forced a light laugh, saying I was just tired from errands, but the way he searched me told me he didn't quite believe it. For a moment, fear shot through me. Had he noticed the chest disturbed, the towel folded differently, the lock turned just slightly off? Did Rachel text him something? I shifted the conversation quickly, asking about his client project, the one he always used as a shield, and he relaxed, launching into jargon I barely heard. But as he spoke, I studied him the way you study a stranger on the subway, detached, curious, searching for the cracks in his mask. And what I saw was chilling. Not guilt, not hesitation, but the ease of a man who believed he was in complete control, who thought he could juggle two women, two lives, without consequence. That night, when I finally got home, I sat on the edge of my bed with my shoes still on, staring into the dark. The voices of the rehearsal still buzzed in my head. Daniel's hopeful questions, Rachel's mocking whisper, Ethan's probing grip, all of it swirling like smoke I couldn't clear. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the photos of evidence until my pulse steadied. Maya was right. I couldn't blow up yet. I had to wait for the perfect moment, the one place where the truth would matter most. And though it broke me, though it carved me hollow from the inside, I knew I could keep the mask on a little longer. For Daniel, for myself, for the justice that was coming. The morning of the wedding felt like walking through a dream that was tipping slowly into a nightmare, the kind where everything looked perfect on the surface. But you knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that disaster was waiting just out of sight. I dressed carefully in the soft gray gown I had chosen months ago, slipped the flash drive into my clutch, and forced a smile into place as my mother fussed over my hair, completely unaware of the war raging inside me. Every detail at the church sparkled with the kind of magic we had all planned. White roses lining the pews, fairy lights strung like constellations across the ceiling. Rachel's Pinterest vision come alive. And, for a fleeting second, I wanted so badly to believe it all, to sink into the fantasy and pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But then Daniel appeared at the end of the aisle, adjusting his tie nervously, and the sight of him nearly broke me. He looked like every groom should on his wedding day, hopeful, nervous, filled with love. And knowing what awaited him if I stayed silent hardened my resolve into steel. The ceremony began, and the music echoed off the stone walls, solemn and breathtaking. The bridesmaids floated down the aisle. The flower girls giggled as they scattered petals. And finally, the doors opened to reveal Rachel, radiant in lace and silk, her smile wide and flawless, her gaze locked on Daniel as though she were the very embodiment of devotion. Everyone around me sighed, eyes misting at the vision of her. But all I could see was the smirk she'd hidden from me the night before, the secret text messages, the photos of her curled against Ethan's shoulder. She looked like an angel, but I knew better. She was a snake in a veil, and I was about to strip away the skin she wore so well. Pastor Miller's voice rolled through the sanctuary, warm and steady, speaking about love, commitment, and the sacred vows about to be exchanged, and the words made my stomach churn. I squeezed the clutch in my lap until my knuckles whitened, feeling the hard edges of the flash drive inside. And then, at last, came the moment. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The familiar pause fell over the church, a quiet, respectful silence where everyone usually smiles and shifts, waiting for the pastor to continue. My throat was dry as ash, but before I lost my nerve, I heard my own voice rise into the silence, trembling but loud enough to carry. I do. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the pews, heads snapped toward me. Daniel's face froze in shock. Rachel blinked rapidly, her smile flickering like a candle in the wind. My pulse pounded so hard, I thought I might faint. But I stood, clutching my bag to my chest, and forced the words out. Daniel, I'm so sorry, but you need to see this before you make a mistake you can't undo. I pulled out my phone, the evidence cued on the screen, and my hands shook as I stepped forward, every eye in the church burning into me. Rachel hissed through clenched teeth, her perfect composure cracking. "What are you doing?" But I ignored her, moving toward Daniel as Pastor Miller stammered, trying to regain control. I held the phone out to Daniel, my voice breaking. "I found this in Ethan's things yesterday. They've been lying to both of us." He frowned, confused, but as his eyes landed on the first photo, the one of Rachel and Ethan wrapped in each other's arms at the lake, his face drained of color. He swiped to the next photo, then the next, each image hitting him like a blow, and the church filled with whispers and gasps as those near him caught glimpses of the screen. "No," Rachel blurted, her voice climbing an octave. "That's not what it looks like, Daniel, I swear." But he kept scrolling, his jaw tightening, his breathing ragged, until he reached the screenshots of their text messages. I saw the exact moment the words registered. "Tonight, we'll finally start our real life." And his hands began to shake. The silence in the sanctuary was suffocating, broken only by Rachel's desperate pleas. "They're old photos. She's twisting things. She's always been jealous of me." Her eyes darted to me, filled with venom, but Daniel turned slowly toward her, his expression hollow, devastated. "Are you telling me these messages aren't from you? That this isn't Ethan's number?" His voice cracked, carrying across the pews. Rachel stammered, I can explain." But the weight of the evidence crushed her excuses before they left her mouth. Ethan, sitting a few rows back, suddenly rose, his face pale but furious, and called out, "Claire, that's enough. You don't know what you're talking about." The congregation twisted to stare at him, whispers surging, and for the first time, the double betrayal was fully visible. Husband and bride, both exposed under the same roof. Daniel's boutonniere shook as he ripped it from his jacket, the petals scattering like ashes onto the floor. He dropped my phone back into my hands, his eyes brimming with tears, but filled with something harder underneath. "You were going to marry me," he said to Rachel, his voice hoarse, "and keep lying. Keep sneaking around with him?" She lunged forward, grabbing his arm, sobbing now. "Please, I love you. It was a mistake. It doesn't mean anything." But Daniel yanked free, his face twisted in pain. "It means everything," he spat. And in that moment, the church erupted into chaos. Relatives whispered, children cried. Rachel's aunt fainted into the arms of an usher. Rachel tore the veil from her head, flinging it down in fury, and stormed down the aisle in her gown, tears streaking her face, while Ethan tried to follow, only to be blocked by a wave of disbelieving family members. I stood frozen near the altar, my chest heaving, every nerve on fire. Part of me wanted to collapse, to disappear into the floorboards. But another part, the stronger part, felt an undeniable surge of relief. The truth was out. Daniel was saved, And no matter how messy the fallout, they could never weave their lies back together again. Daniel turned to me then, his face wet, his voice breaking. "Thank you," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, and that single word made every ounce of my terror worth it. The church, that had been buzzing with anticipation only hours earlier, now felt like a battlefield after the smoke cleared, hushed voices and stunned faces scattered among overturned programs and wilted flowers. The fairy lights above still glowing mockingly against a backdrop of devastation. Guests shuffled out in clumps, whispering furiously, some avoiding eye contact with me altogether, while others gave small nods of grim respect, as if they understood what it must have cost to bring the truth to light. Rachel was gone, storming from the sanctuary in a blur of lace and tears, her veil trampled under the shoes of retreating relatives, and though part of me wanted to chase her down and scream every ounce of rage I carried, another part knew she was already destroyed. Her perfect bride act shattered in front of 300 witnesses, her reputation scorched beyond repair. Ethan lingered longer, pacing near the side aisle like a caged animal, his jaw clenched, his phone flashing in his hand, as though he was searching for the right lie to spin. But no words came. When he finally approached me, his voice was low, desperate, angry. "Why did you do this? You humiliated me in front of everyone." I stared at him, hollow, too exhausted for theatrics, and said simply, "You humiliated yourself the moment you betrayed us." For once, he had no clever retort, just a hard swallow and a shadow across his face as he realized the world he'd constructed had collapsed in public view. By evening, he was gone, packing his things in silence, slamming drawers, his suitcase wheels thudding down the steps before he drove off, without saying goodbye, leaving behind only the echo of his absence and a house that suddenly felt both cavernous and strangely free. Daniel was the one who broke my heart most in those hours after the ceremony. He sat in the fellowship hall still dressed in his tux, his boutonniere crushed in his hand, staring blankly at the crumbs of untouched cake on a paper plate. When I walked in, his eyes flicked up to mine, red and swollen, and for a second, I thought he might rage at me for ruining his day. But instead, he whispered, "You saved me." And the words cracked something inside me. I sat beside him, just like I had when he was a boy crying after a playground fight, and he leaned into me with the weight of a man whose entire foundation had just been ripped away. "She never loved me," he said, his voice hollow, "not for 1 second." I wanted to argue, to soften it somehow, but lying to him now would be another betrayal. So I just squeezed his hand and let him cry. Our family gathered slowly around us, aunts and uncles offering awkward embraces, my mother dabbing her eyes with tissues, my father muttering darkly about always knowing something was off with that girl. For the first time all day, I felt less alone. The truth was messy, brutal, but it had united those who mattered against the ones who had tried to poison us from within. The days that followed blurred into a haze of phone calls and paperwork. Maya drove down to help me file the divorce petition, her sharp, efficient tone on the phone, with the clerk a strange comfort against the chaos of my emotions. Each form I signed, each line dividing assets and accounts, felt like severing a thread I hadn't realized was strangling me. Ethan tried once to text me, long paragraphs about how I had misunderstood, about how Rachel had manipulated him, about how he could still fix us if I gave him a chance. I didn't reply. His words felt as empty as the coffee mug still sitting in our sink, dried rings etched into the porcelain, a relic of routines that no longer meant anything. Rachel, I heard through whispers in town, had left within a week, vanishing from social media, her family too embarrassed to defend her. Some said she fled to another state. Others claimed she was staying with a distant cousin out west. But none of it mattered. What mattered was that Daniel would never have to wake up beside her lies. Even with the truth exposed, the price weighed heavy. Daniel moved back into my parents' house, the same childhood bedroom where his baseball trophies still lined the shelves. And at night, I'd find him sitting on the porch steps, staring into the dark. One evening, he said quietly, "I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again." His voice cracked, and I felt the sting of his pain like it was my own. I told him the truth. That trust wasn't gone forever. It just needed time to grow back. That not everyone was like Rachel. That love could be real, even if it had failed us here. He looked at me with haunted eyes and asked, "And what about you? How do you feel knowing Ethan?" But I cut him off gently, saying, "My marriage was already over. I just didn't want to see it." The words felt strangely liberating as they left my mouth, like acknowledging them aloud finally released me from years of quiet denial. The house felt different without Ethan. Quieter, lighter, but also lonelier. At first, the empty spaces where his clothes had hung or his shoes had sat felt like missing pieces, but slowly I began to see them as possibilities instead. I converted his office, once a sterile place filled with tangled wires and computer parts, back into my art studio, setting up the easel I'd abandoned years ago. The first brushstrokes I laid down were shaky, a mess of blues and grays, but they bled into each other like the storm that had consumed me. And when the colors finally gave way to streaks of gold, I realized I was painting not just grief, but the first flicker of hope. Quiet evenings that once suffocated me now became spaces for rediscovery. I cooked recipes I'd torn from magazines years ago, called friends I hadn't spoken to in ages, and sat by the window with a book, unbothered by the silence. Still, the weight of what happened lingered. Sometimes I'd wake in the night with Ethan's voice in my ears, or Rachel's mocking whisper at the rehearsal, and for a moment my chest would seize with the old dread. But then I'd remember Daniel's hug in the fellowship hall, his broken whisper of thanks, and I'd know I had done the right thing. Truth cost us both dearly. It stripped me of a husband and him of a fiancé. But it had also spared us from futures built on lies. And that, in the end, was worth the price. Months have passed since that day, and sometimes it still feels like a film reel I watched rather than a life I lived. Flashes of Rachel's veil crumpled on the church floor, Ethan's voice raised in desperate denial. Daniel's hollow whisper of thanks, all playing back in fragments whenever I pass the sanctuary on my way to work. But the strange thing about storms is that once they've torn everything apart, they leave behind a strange kind of clarity. And in the quiet after, you finally see what really matters. I rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, not with grand gestures, but with small, ordinary acts of reclaiming myself. I painted more canvases, each one brighter than the last, until the walls of my studio bloomed with colors that spoke of both pain and survival. I learned to cook for one without feeling the ache of an empty chair, turned evenings once filled with anxious waiting into hours of peace, and discovered that solitude could feel like freedom rather than punishment. The house no longer felt haunted by Ethan's absence. Instead, it became mine again, every room a canvas where I could begin anew. Daniel healed in his own way too, though his wounds were deeper. At first, he was restless, pacing the porch at night as though Rachel might return with apologies that could erase everything. But over time, the restless steps turned into long conversations between us, the kind we hadn't had since childhood. We sat side by side, watching fireflies rise from the grass, talking about trust, about how sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the darkest truths, and about how survival isn't about pretending it didn't hurt, but about carrying the hurt without letting it define you. He told me once, voice quiet in the dark, "I thought my life ended that day." And I answered, "Maybe it ended the way you imagined it, but it began again in a way that will protect you from living a lie." He nodded slowly, and in that moment, I knew he believed me, even if the scars would take longer to fade. Our family circled around us tighter after the fallout. My parents called more often. My aunts invited us for dinners where laughter felt almost like it used to. And I realized that sometimes tragedy doesn't destroy a family. It reforges it, burns away the surface level pleasantries, and leaves only the raw, unshakable bond underneath. We didn't whisper about Rachel or Ethan anymore. We didn't need to. Their absence became its own story, a cautionary tale of what happens when people choose selfishness over love. Last I heard, Rachel had disappeared to another state, her once perfect reputation in tatters, and Ethan had moved west chasing some vague career excuse, both of them ghosts we no longer feared. Their power over us had evaporated the moment the truth was laid bare. Looking back now, I realize the greatest victory wasn't in humiliating them or watching their plans crumble. It was in knowing that the truth, painful as it was, set us free. Free from illusions, free from betrayal, free to rebuild lives that were honest instead of fabricated. I thought losing Ethan would leave me broken, but what I lost was a man who had already left me in all the ways that mattered. What I gained was the chance to rediscover myself without the weight of his lies. And Daniel. He may carry scars from Rachel's betrayal, but he carries them as lessons now. Sharper eyes and stronger instincts that will guide him towards someone worthy of his love one day. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that the truth always costs something. Sometimes it costs comfort, sometimes it costs relationships you thought were permanent. But in the end, the price is worth it, because lies can only build cages, while truth, no matter how heavy, opens doors. I used to think love was about holding on no matter what. But now, I know it's about knowing when to let go, when to choose yourself, and when to protect the people you love from the traps they can't see. As I sit in my studio now, painting a sunrise in streaks of gold and orange, I realize that storms don't just end things. They clear the sky for beginnings you never imagined. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes, what feels like the end of everything is really just the start of something true.